A lot of talk about there about deterrence and Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden, showing support for Israel. I wonder also how much of it is also a show of support to Israel as a point to the Iranians and others that, look, we're going to stand by Israel pretty much no matter what. Don't get involved. Do you think that's the message they want to be read loud and clear?
Yeah, the two visits so far, Biden yesterday and Rishi Sunak today, entirely deliberate, very clever, very strategic. What they're saying is that the US and the UK stand with Israel. We are friends, we are allies. But it's also an opportunity to caution Israel in terms of restraint. And it's very, very important that as this unfolds now, that there are rules of conflict, that we end hostilities at the first opportunity, that we open the corridors for humanitarian aid, that we work with our partners in the region as well, and also importantly that we actually allow the Israelis to do what they have to do.
And this is the thing, are those two things compatible? It's interesting that Joe Biden, as we've just been discussing, said to Benjamin Netanyahu, look, don't make the mistakes we made after 9/11. We wanted justice, we sought justice, we got justice to a certain extent, but, don't be consumed, by the anger, by the hate. And I have to say, if I was Israeli right now, I'd be like, blow everyone to smithereens who could be a part of this. I think that'd be an understandable human emotion that people have. However, we know the human cost of this, not just to the people of Gaza, but to the whole of the Middle East, would be absolutely huge as a result of that. We've already seen protests in other Middle Eastern countries. We are seeing, Iran certainly sort of flexing its muscles with Hezbollah. How worried are you? How concerned are you that this could explode out of control and that we could be seeing this being far more than just about Gaza?
Yeah, the essential dichotomy at the heart of this is the need to defeat Hamas, but also the need not to take on Palestine. It's not about the Palestinians. We support the Palestinian people. We've got people on the streets of the UK right now, and it's really important that what we do is dial down the rhetoric, and that we do not engage in any way. That the Israelis do not engage in any way with indiscriminate attacks on civilian locations. But what's fascinating, Julia, is this, and let's be absolutely clear. What happened 2 weekends ago in southern Israel was the Israeli 9/11. Brutal, pre-planned terrorist attack. It was very deliberate, clearly planned for a matter of weeks, if not months. And the rock festival, music festival was targeted. Hamas knew where they were going. And the loss of 1,400 or thereabouts lives, innocent lives, and the hostage taking is pretty repugnant. So the Israelis are going to go after it. The Israelis are going to go and do what they have been perhaps wanting to do for a while. And we are going to see ground troops into Gaza, and we're going to see an effort now to eradicate Hamas from Gaza.
The question of that, of course, will mean, a couple of million people displaced, people right now without food, without water, without fuel. We are looking at a very, very desperate situation for the people of Gaza. Do you agree with Humza Yousaf, the Scottish First Minister, talking about how those who do want to leave, there'll be many who won't, that they could be offered safe refuge in Scotland? Do you think they should be in the rest of the UK as well?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. We've got this pressure cooker at the moment called Gaza, and at some point we've got to let the steam off. And there is no doubt at all we've got to open the corridors to the south. We've got to allow some kind of diplomatic effort in there as well. But what's interesting is, with the crossing to the south being opened, and hopefully opened a lot more, people are going to come out, and that's going to give a problem to the Egyptian government in particular. So I think it's entirely reasonable to expect the UN having to take lead on this. Let's get behind the UN and let's help Egypt with the problem that's coming their way.
Yeah, but Egypt doesn't want the problem. We've actually seen Sisi say, we don't want the Gazan refugees. No Arab country does.
You can't put a wall around Gaza and expect people.
There literally is. There's a fence around Gaza.
But there will be refugees. There are many innocent people there. There are just ordinary people like you and I, with businesses and lives and children and mothers and fathers. And so the point is, you can't ignore that. We've got to get aid in. We've got to look after these people. So
you say we can't ignore it. A lot of Palestinians and supporters of their cause in the UK and elsewhere would say, actually, the Western world ignores that day in, day out, year after year.
Well, this isn't the time for discussing the two-state solution. It's not a time for discussing history. It's not about the Palestinian-Israeli issue in terms of what's been happening for the last 60, 70 years. This is about now assisting people in Gaza. This is about defeating Hamas. This is about bringing the hostages home. This is about now facilitating what Israel needs to do in terms of defeating Hamas. It can't go on. And you know, the rhetoric coming out of, you know, political groupings and the stuff we're seeing on the streets of the UK and Palestinian demonstrations next to the cenotaph, it's all pretty difficult and unpalatable. So what we have to do is dial down the rhetoric. We have to objectively work together as an international community to work out what needs to be done. We're going to give clear rules to Israel in terms of reminding them of their responsibilities under international law. But ultimately, Israel are going to go and do this, and they've got to do it in a way that with the least pain possible.
Okay, you raised the cenotaph just briefly. I mean, a number of MPs have signed a letter saying they don't want to have these sort of protests and demonstrations. Basically, you know, they had a stage, you know, of the demonstration on Saturday, basically next to the cenotaph in Whitehall. Do you agree that should be treated almost, you know, as a sacred site, and that actually that's not an appropriate place for people to set up to have the main stage of their protests?
I totally do. The cenotaph is a sacred site. It's very representative of the fallen, those who've served the United Kingdom and its forces, and those who've served beyond that. So ultimately, it's not a stage for political activity.
Okay.
Take the political activity elsewhere. So I think that was a mistake. Whoever gave permission for that made a mistake.
I have to say, we're still none the wiser about who did agree to that. It does seem very, very provocative. Can I ask you finally also, the Israeli president, when he met with Rishi Sunak, one of the things he said in terms of, you know, thank you very much for your support and things, but he also raised the BBC's, his words, distortion of the facts for refusing to call Hamas terrorists, and also for on-air reporters at the time of in the wake of the attack that left hundreds dead in the hospital in Gaza, they saying, well, we can't see there's anyone who could possibly have done this other than Israel. That, you know, that version of events went around the world, went around the Arab world in particular. The BBC is treated as a trusted source, as an independent source, treated as, you know, Britain speaking, effectively. That has done huge damage, especially given that actually it's very much under question now whether Israel was responsible for that missile strike. Certainly the evidence the IDF has presented suggests they're very much unlikely to be behind that strike, and that it was a misfired Palestinian missile. Do you think the BBC needs to be held to account on this?
Yes, we're seeing political bias creeping into the BBC more and more. The BBC right now risks losing its global reputation for unbiased reporting. The reporting is not unbiased. The refusal to acknowledge the terrorist attack in southern Israel was a failure, in my view, in the same way that the BBC refusing to acknowledge Welsh politicians or the Welsh government with the record fines being given to Welsh Water today is also a failure. We've got to stamp political bias out of the BBC. We've got to make sure that we're reporting objectively and fairly, and I'm afraid there's work to do.